Hey, is 2020 a year that we really care to remember all too much? I mean, we did fall into a worldwide pandemic with COVID-19. A lot of people that own businesses lost their business. A lot of people that lost their jobs in that year. A lot of people lost their lives in that year. But for those that survived the fallout of this pandemic of COVID-19, we were all pretty much sent home to telework. And from there, we were very bored. A lot of us were just watching TV, eating all kinds of junk food, all kinds of bad food for us, not working out. We were social distancing from each other, from our friends, our family. Nobody was around anybody. All of us were just home being bored and working a telework job for at least close to 10 months, if not longer. I believe I was in the middle of that as well. I was teleworking around that time. Actually, I was more like teleworking towards the end of 2020 into 2021. I was 100% teleworking at the start of 2021. So in that year, there was a lot of bad. But can't say that there wasn't any good. In 2020 was the start of the 9th generation of video game consoles, and that is the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series consoles, both the S as in Sam and the X as in X-ray. A lot of people were hunting for the PS5. And that is what the nature of this video is about. It is about the PlayStation 5. But we're going to get more into that. We're going to dive deeper into this. When this machine first came out, as a matter of fact, when both the Xbox Series consoles and the PlayStation 5 came out, we had pretty low manufacturing numbers. Reason why that is semiconductors were few and far in between. Manufacturers were not able to obtain semiconductors from the likes of AMD and Nvidia, mostly AMD, because AMD were the ones that were contracted to do both the consoles, both the PlayStation and the Xbox. So during that year, 2020, well, they started manufacturing these machines back in 2019, but they were being released in 2020. And while they were being released in 2020, the machines were out, but they were still heavily making brand new machines. And that's where the problem lies. With the shortage of semiconductors, they couldn't make as many consoles as they would like. Their goal was over 1 million or 1.5 million every 2 or 3 months. They had to cut those numbers in half. They had to do either half that number or a quarter. 250,000 consoles in 3 months, that's bad. Especially at the start of the generation. Within the first year, the first launch year of your console, and you can only produce, if you're lucky, you'll be only able to produce 1 million in 1 year. That is terrible. And that's what made the PS5 that much harder to get. And on the flip side of it, from the customer side of this whole debacle, this whole fiasco, is the fact that it was so hard to find because scalpers. It was the scalpers that were buying consoles with automated AI bots online that were automatically grab hardware, grab a PlayStation, and throw it in the cart within milliseconds, faster than a human could do, faster than a normal person can click a link on a PlayStation and put it in their cart. Scalpers would use these automatic bots at numerous online storefronts. Walmart, Target, Best Buy, the list goes on. So they were using those bots as an advantage to be able to buy multiples, maybe hundreds, maybe even thousands of PlayStations before anybody else could. And then once it's in their hands, they can resell it at 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 times the normal price of the PlayStation 5, which is only $500. I say only. $500 to a lot of people is a lot of money, but the consoles were originally priced at a retail price of $500. So when scalpers get their hands on this type of hardware that is in such high demand and such low numbers of availability, of course they're going to make a profit, and they did. A lot of them did. They made a lot of money reselling multiples, hundreds and thousands of consoles within one season. And they made a mint. They made a lot of money from this. So this is the second time Sony has decided to make a Pro edition of one of their consoles, the PlayStation 5. They've done this before back in 2016 with the PlayStation 4. And well, it was an upgraded machine. It was capable. It was definitely more capable of what the base console was. And back then, to be honest, and I think we all agree, all the gamers agree, we really did need a mid-generation upgrade based on the existing hardware of 2013. PS4, when the PlayStation 4 first came out, the hardware was already old about a full year before the machine came out, especially the Xbox One. Both machines were sorely underpowered when it came out. Mainly, they were bottlenecked from their CPU, their central processing unit. They both had what was the equivalent of a cellular phone CPU, which was really bad. They did it back then because they were really concerned about these machines overheating, especially Xbox. Xbox had a huge problem with the 8th generation consoles, with the Xbox 360. When they first launched that machine, 90, like maybe 50, 60, maybe even 70% of those consoles had red ring of death. And that would mean that the machines would break down on their own due to overheating, that the fan system was not effective enough to cool the processor, and the processor would overheat, and it would start doing graphical corruptions on the screen until it eventually just failed and died. So Sony and Microsoft decided to play it safer, to making smaller chipsets for the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, just so they can keep the machines cool. But when you do that, you sacrifice performance. Really bad performance. So that's why it was very necessary to even have a mid-generation upgrade back then. 2016 was Sony's when they made the PlayStation 4, the PlayStation 4 Pro, and Xbox did one in 2017 with the Xbox One X. So when they decided to go and make a Pro for the PlayStation 5, some of us were against this because, you know, we really haven't seen what you can do with the base PlayStation 5. So now you want to sell us on a PlayStation 5 Pro 4 years into the generation? You've barely seen what you can do with just the standard. But here you're promising a whole laundry list of abilities and features that this machine can do that the base PlayStation 4 can't do. So is that any good towards us, the customers? Not really. This machine was really honestly built for the developers. This way they can actually really do what the original PS5 could not do. Everything that was on the box, that was mentioned on the box, especially 8K resolution, which Sony sneakily took off the box. They scrubbed that off the box. But if you have the original PlayStation 5 release box, it's sitting right there front and center. 8K resolution on the box, along with 4K resolution gaming and up to 120 frames per second. You don't see that a whole lot. You don't even see that consistently. But when it does happen, it's a nice feature to see when it works. But that is very few and far between. We'll be lucky if we can get over 100 frames on any given game. Any given AAA game, we'll be lucky if we hit over 100 frames per second. If it's not a shooter and it's a heavily graphical game, such as, I would say, Alan Wake 2, maybe God of War, definitely The Last of Us 2. If any of those games could reach 120 at any moment in the game, you're lucky. That's on the base PlayStation 5. So maybe that's one of the reasons why they made the Pro. So the base PlayStation 5, it was your standard console that you would expect as far as hardware. As far as the PlayStation 5 specs were concerned, it's everything that you would think that a console should be. Everything a console would be, and no more than that, because it wasn't a PC. A lot of people want to compare it to NVIDIA's 30 series class of video cards. That was definitely a tall order. It was nowhere near that. You'll be lucky if it would. I mean, the machine can do ray tracing, yes, and it can do it somewhat well, but it's nowhere near the leagues of a standard full-fledged PC. So let's go over some of the specs of what we've had before we dive into what the PS5 Pro has to offer. When the PlayStation 5 first came out, when it was first introduced from Mark Cerny back then, he gave a deep dive into the components of the PlayStation 5, and we were comparing it to the PlayStation 4's capabilities from back in 2013. It was a huge leap in semiconductors and hardware that was stuffed into this machine, and we were all very impressed. The four main things that stood out to us was the CPU, gotta have a good CPU, a GPU, which is the graphics processing unit, just how much RAM the machine has, 16 gigs of RAM, and the internal storage, which was an SSD, the first of its kind, an SSD storage pool within your console. These were the first consoles to have SSDs, and that was because the developers really asked for extremely fast storage space. They want to be able to stream textures from their hard drives, from the internal storage pool onto the game engine. And in theory, once those textures were decompressed from the storage unit, it can go straight into the game's engine and display on screen in its full fidelity, and hopefully that fidelity would be a full fat 4K resolution. Didn't happen every time, because a lot of times these games were using what is called as reconstructive resolution. And what that is, reconstructive resolution is when you render a game and we render an image in a much lower resolution, and you use AI mechanics, AI-induced reconstruction of that image in a much bigger picture, but with less memory. And in theory, it works. In theory, it works very well. You may have some problems with ghosting, and you may have some issues with the speed of your game. Well, that will be your frame rate. Sometimes it can affect your frame rate worse than it should, but in most cases, it improves the frame rate. It's designed to help improve frame rate performance while rendering a much smaller screen at a lower resolution, but reconstructing the image in a higher resolution just to save on performance. If the CPU and the GPU can save time on drawing a full screen of 4K resolution while pushing a game to 60 frames or 120 frames, that's a win. If it can do it well and the image is crisp and clear, that is a win for us gamers. The standard PlayStation 5 GPU, or graphics processing unit, has the capability of outputting 10.28 teraflops per second, or T-flops for short. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, what the heck is a T-flop? Well, a T-flop or teraflop means trillions of floating point operations per second. Try saying that 3 times fast. Trillions of floating points operations per second. Actually, I can. Now I know what you're also probably thinking. What the heck is a floating point? Well, to be honest, you wouldn't care. And I don't care to explain it. Just know that this machine's performance has enough power to power the CPU of your car, power the CPU in your PC or laptop. It can power your house. It can power just about anything in your typical household. Teraflops of information. Just honestly, you only really need 2 or 3 teraflops of information to run your entire house. This thing is overkill running at 10.28. So yeah, don't worry about what a teraflop is. Leave that to the professionals. A graphical rendering technique called checkerboard rendering, which kind of originated on the PlayStation 4, is a form of rendering where the machine will take half the image and draw it on one frame, and take the second half of the image and draw it on the next frame, and alternate frame after frame after frame after frame. And it does it in milliseconds. It does it so fast that the eye can't tell the difference, that the machine, that what you're playing on screen is half the screen, and then the next frame is the next half. It does it so fast that you cannot tell the difference. And it seems seamless. It seems like it's one big picture, when in reality it's half of the photo. It's half of the picture on the screen. And when you do rendering like that, when a machine does rendering like that, in theory, you should have system resources left over to allow for high frame rates, such as 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second, 240, the list goes on. The PS4 and the PS5, both base consoles, were designed to do that kind of rendering so that they can have a performance mode in their games. PS5 Pro is supposed to help enhance that, or actually change that altogether. So how does the PS5 Pro compare to the base PlayStation 5? Let's take a deeper dive into the system specifications, shall we? Let's start with the CPU, or the SoC, which is short for System on Chip. The SoC, or System on Chip, has been enlarged. I don't know the dimensions of what the chip was originally in the PlayStation 5 base console, but it has been enlarged to be able to fit more transistors on the chip. So it has been upgraded from 10 teraflops to 16.7 teraflops. That is a huge advantage over the competition. But, teraflops doesn't always just measure the full. It's not the end-all be-all of a system's performance. There are other factors in mind. We've learned that before when it came to the Xbox Series X, but I digress. So the system also has additional memory. It still comes standard with 16 gigs of RAM, just like the base PlayStation 5, but there's an additional 2 gigs of DDR5 RAM just for the system's operating system, which is much needed because you want to be able to keep the entire pool of 16 gigs just for the games and not have to worry about system leaks, memory leaks, from having to dip into that pool of game memory for running the system fan and keeping the system cool and worrying about sound. So you want to be able to free up that storage. You want to free up that memory with additional RAM. So overall, the machine has gone from 16 gigs of standard RAM, now is up to 18. But only 2 gigs is used for the operating system, like I mentioned before, and it's slightly slower. That is DDR5 RAM and not the GDDR6. And well, with that being dedicated RAM for the machine's operations, like in the background operations, that is much needed. So that also does guarantee that they can keep, that should, in theory, allow the machine to still display the HUDs and the UI, the home UI, and a full 4K resolution, or maybe even 8K resolution. But I'm not going to hold Sony to that. More likely, it's just going to stay 4. We don't even want to talk about 8K resolution. Not for the next, at least probably another 4 or 5 years. No one's going to care about 8K resolution for a while, especially in gaming. So yeah, we can forget about that. Moving on, and lastly, we come down to the system storage capacity, which is a full 2 terabytes of system storage, which is a lot better than what it was back in 2020 with just 825 gigs of storage space. You were if back then, if you were to install 2, maybe 3 major AAA games for the base PS5, you're out of memory. You automatically have to go and upgrade your storage space so you can have more games installed. And well, storage space of that size is still very expensive. They do have off-brand models now. They do have 3 or 4 major manufacturers that have different configurations of storage space that you can use now. Slightly cheaper. It's better than, overall, it is better than proprietary memory that Xbox is doing, but it's still high priced. For the most part, you're still paying for I would say for 2 terabytes for a PC card like that. It's probably going to run you about $160, maybe. It probably, back then, it would have been a lot more. 2 terabytes of storage, SSD of that size. Yeah, that was probably $250. Maybe close to $300. Now it's coming standard with the PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 5 Pro, and that's probably why the machine costs the way it is. And we're gonna get to that. You may or may not have known, PlayStation 5 Pro, with all its fine bells and whistles, the whole full package, right? The whole 9 yards. Well, this machine does come out this week, November the 7th, at a nice little retail price of $700. That's right, you heard me right. $700 for the PS5 Pro. Now, as good as that may sound to you, that sounds like a deal, right? $700 for a brand new console that's 16.7 teraflops of power. Oh man, that's a steal. You can't replicate that on the PC with that kind of price, could I? Nah, you can't do it, right? Well, people have their ways of being able to do that. But we're not gonna get into that. That's a video for another day. So with this machine debuting this week, let's discuss what's actually coming with this machine. So, along with the hardware, what comes in the box, what the machine can do from the get-go. Well, we're hoping that Sony is advertising that this machine should, and I'm going to put an asterisk there, the machine should allow for developers to provide us gamers with much more steady frame rates than we ever had before. And that is either with locked frame rates that never drop, or with unlocked frame rates that just stay consistent to the performance mode that we've assigned the game to run. Whether that's going to be 60 frames a second or 120 frames per second, more likely it's going to be 60 frames. If we want consistent unlocked frame rate at a consistently locked frame rate is going to be 60. 120 frames, I'm telling you, for this machine is still a tall order. Even with this kind of performance, it's still a tall order because AAA games are getting heavier. Okay, everyone has to understand that AAA games are getting heavier and heavier on the processing unit and the GPU. And with this machine's CPU relatively the same as the original PlayStation 5, the most that we can really hope for is consistent 60 frame rates for our AAA games. Now, AA games and indie games, no problem. Gonna run those games like a dream. It's the AAA games that you gotta worry about. We'll get into that anyway. We will get into that in a little bit, but I digress. More consistent frame rates for our games. And along with that, Sony has developed what they have dubbed as the PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution. And you heard that right, the pisser. PlayStation's Spectral Super Resolution, which is their built from the ground up temporal reconstruction for the quality of their pictures, so they can actually the quality of low resolution games that can be outputted at higher resolutions, hopefully to a full 4K. Close to it if you can't get the full 4K, close to 4K. So say for example, a game like let's say Days Gone that debuted for PS4 actually. I believe that was not a full 4K back then. It was more like 1440p was its main output. So if you were to run that game on the PS5 Pro, it would take that base resolution of 1440p and it would use the pisser or the PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution. Man, really they need to shorten that. They can take that reconstruction technique and output the game on your screen at a full 4K. In theory, it should be able to do it. And with that being done, system resources should be freed up to allow the game to run at a higher frame rate. 60 frames, perhaps locked at 60 frames, or even higher, 120. You're not going to get 240. You're not going to get 240. You're definitely not going to get 240 frames per second on none of these games. Not on the console, I guarantee you on that. We'll be lucky if we hit a consistent 120 frames. We'll be lucky. And even if we do, even when we do get 120 frames, the resolution is so low, in most cases is running at 1080p or 720p or 900p, if we're even that lucky. So 120 frames, the higher your frame rates, the lower your resolution is going to be. That's just how it is, and that's how it is on the PC. So nothing's going to change that. No amount of reconstruction is going to change that. Okay, unless your entire game is running in the RAM and nowhere else but the CPU and RAM. Your games you'll be lucky if you get 120 frames at 1080p or 1440p. You'll be lucky. And then lastly, we are supposed to be getting, we'll find that out too, we're supposed to be getting higher quality ray tracing or path tracing to produce more realistic lighting and more accurate shadows for each character on screen. Ray tracing, I can make a video just simply on ray tracing. Ray tracing is so heavily taxing on these machines, it is not worth using. Not worth using in a AAA game, maybe worth using in like a AA or indie game, but AAA games, definitely leave that to the big boys. Leave that to the PC. Ray tracing really should just stay on PC. It should never touch consoles, because now we have this expectations that we're going to have the most realistic lighting, we have the most realistic shadows at high frame rates, and we're just not getting it. So would a PS5 Pro be able to to change that status quo would be able to do the impossible. I mean, a decade ago, ray tracing was a pipe dream. PCs were dreaming, oh, we can't wait to have ray tracing on games on PC. And now that it's here, what AMD, Sony, and Microsoft think they're just going to flip a switch and think we're going to have ray tracing on each and every game. We still don't have ray tracing on Halo Infinite. They promised that, and it's still not here. It's not even here on PC. So that shows us as gamers that the developers really don't care to use ray tracing all that much when they really want their game to just perform well. Because if you turn it on, you're just going to drop frames. And that's not good for anybody. Single player games, I guess, is fine. Yeah, Spider-Man 2 has it. And Gran Turismo 7, that has ray tracing in it. Well, right now, until the Pro drops, until the PlayStation 5 Pro releases, you can get ray tracing on Gran Turismo only during the replay. But as soon as this machine comes out, it's going to join the same thing that Forza Motorsport 8 can do, and that is display true ray tracing on the tracks while you're racing. It will look cool for those that actually, manipulating their cameras to see all that, like I was doing, but you're really not going to care too much when you're in the heat of a race. You just want to win. So anyway, ray tracing is back, and Sony claims it's going to be better than ever. We're going to find out, aren't we? Digital Foundry, I guarantee you, Digital Foundry is going to pick that apart on every game that claims we have advanced ray tracing, and they're going to show us the truth. It's either really good, like Sony claims it is, or it's more the same, only that it's rendering at a slightly higher resolution. Slightly. And we're still sacrificing performance for the sake of ray tracing and low res reflections. We will see. So this machine comes out this year. There's no exclusives for this game. There's no exclusive release for this machine this week. Everything that they were releasing this year is already out. They only had 2 exclusives, first-party exclusives, and one of them died. That is Concord. The other one was Astrobot, which had performed pretty well. That game is pretty cool. I would imagine it's going to run very well on the Pro. Hopefully that game has enhancements that really shine on the Pro. But who really knows? But the fact of the matter is, $700 with no exclusives to release with this machine. No new games for the PS5 Pro and no exclusives for the PS5 Pro on the day it releases. Just none of that. Is it worth it? Well, you tell me. Tell me down there in the comments. Let me know that you're extremely happy with your PS5 Pro, and I'll stand corrected. I myself, I can wait. And since next year is Grand Theft Auto 6, I originally thought this machine was coming out in 2025. I thought Sony would be smarter than this. I thought they would release this with the same year release of Grand Theft Auto 5. Now that's a reason to buy a PS5 Pro, is to have the best console version, let me stress that, the best console version of Grand Theft Auto 6 on a console will be the PS5 Pro. In theory, at least it better. It better be the best version. For $700, it better be the best version. Don't think it's going to be 60 frames. Don't think it's going to be 60 frames or 100 frames or 120. No. That game's going to be 30. And if it by any chance be 60 frames, man, that resolution is going to be somewhere around 900p or 1080p. I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. GTA 6, that game is gonna be a monster. Guaranteed to sell consoles. Guaranteed. If there is any doubt as to why these machines aren't selling, is because everyone will say, I'm waiting for GTA 6. So I can't get it on PC. It's not going to be on PS4. It's only on current generation consoles. It's only on the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series consoles. So you have your choice of 4 consoles here. And yeah, we will see just how well the Pro performs. I'm going to keep a really close eye on how well it sells. I want to know if it's going to sell out. I do predict it's going to sell out for the most part. It's going to sell out between now and Christmas. The real test is how well it's going to do after the holiday season. Once we hit spring, is it still selling the way it should be selling? Well, yeah, we're going to revisit this in the spring. We're going to revisit the overall success of the PS5 Pro in the spring. And Sony, I'm going to stress this one last time. If you don't start advertising your hardware on TV, I'm going to say it again, on television, it's going to end up like the PSVR 2. What is the PSVR 2? Go and Google that, okay? Because none of y'all guys know what that is, except for us hardcore. Us hardcore players know what the PSVR 2 is, and none of you guys do. And that was $550. It's going to die a swift death if this thing does not have commercials. But we'll see. We'll see. And that, we're soon going to find out if this machine really is a pro or a big fat no. And with that being said, I'm your host, Musical Weapon. Thanks for watching. We'll do this again.